Hello.
Our story begins on Mortis, with a last-second shift in the dynamic. Ahsoka had been pretty much killed by the Son, and now he was preparing to rampage against his own father. The fate of the Son had been shifted by his inability to resist darkness, and the father, knowing all too well what sat beyond the Mortis realm for the galaxy, knew in good conscience that he could not abandon Skywalker. He, himself, would not be enough influence. The father needed someone more gentle, with more patience, than he could afford this late into his life. As the son prepared to sling a dagger through his heart, the father used the force to pull the weapon from the hands of the son. He was completely taken aback by this move. Initially, the son believed that his father would kill him, and it made him angrier. Then, the reality of his father's motivations came into view, as he twisted the dagger around and slung it through his own stomach. Anakin watched from a distance, as he had been the one to hold the daughter back, for making a move that would sacrifice her life to her brother's attack. She shoved Anakin's hand off of her arm and stepped forward, watching the father fall to his knees. The son, thinking he wanted this, felt no satisfaction. He felt horror retch through his body as he stepped towards his creator. The father, still holding the dagger, told his son it was okay, and as the child knelt before his father, the same dagger that would take his life was shoved right through the heart of the son, and he collapsed immediately. He whispered out the shame in his betrayal, and now he had never expected the father to do this to him. As the son fell lifeless into his father's arms, the daughter gripped her father, trying to give him her life force, but he told her to stop. Anakin's reaction had set into motion the next series of events that would change the course of galactic history. He then whispered something into her ears. It was both desirous and filled with contrition. He never wanted it to come to an end like this, but the son had deviated too much. The daughter took in everything her father told her, and as per his request, she helped him off the ground. They stumbled over to Ahsoka's lifeless body, and Anakin was directed to kneel between the father and his apprentice. He transferred the life of the powerful being into Ahsoka's body, so that she could be reborn, and given a second chance to exist. As the father's last breaths were taken, Ahsoka coughed heavily and regained consciousness. Anakin wrapped her up and asked if she was alright, but honestly she was just confused. She had no grasp on what had happened to her. She didn't know that she had died, and had been resurrected. The daughter, though, she wept, as her father made her promise one last thing, something that neither Anakin nor Ahsoka heard. It was the silent end to a long and powerful reign. The Mortis realm would be left without their power, and the Force forever unchecked by the state of imbalance that awaited it. The daughter, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan would put to rest father and son, allowing them to lay in their mausoleums for the rest of eternity, bearing that their souls might find some semblance of peace in such serenity. The betrayer and the betrayed. Who was who? Anakin, after they quietly left the final resting places of two of the three ones, asked the daughter what she promised to do. She turned and asked what he meant. There was a moment Skywalker hadn't truly recollected. Everything was a blur to him. But when she prepared to move on the father and put her body before his, Anakin said something. She had heard it. Anakin didn't realize he had said it either. Skywalker told her that he needed her. For what? Neither of them knew nor understood. Anakin said the words, but he didn't recall doing so. The daughter had heard them, but didn't know what they meant. She, though, admitted that she had made a promise to her father to oversee their return to the mortal realm. If Anakin would not remain on Mortis to oversee it, then she would exist as a guide for his own life, and all of those that surrounded him. The balance of the Force could not be swept away into dysfunction again. It was an existential threat that could potentially release greater powers in the galaxy, something so evil that the ones had to banish it far beyond the galaxy, inside of the mall. Her warning to Anakin was what he needed to do. The daughter wasn't happy with the promise she made for her father, but it was his dying wish, and she planned to fulfill his request. Instead of returning to the galaxy with three members, they would be accompanied by the fourth, the daughter herself. When they exited Mortis, her lambent skin stopped shimmering, and slowly started to look like flesh. Anakin was the first to question this change, and she admitted that like his growth in power on Mortis, she would lose many of her natural affinities for the Force without the hub of raw midichlorians present in her home. She then expressed to the three of them that they would continue to see her as a goddess from Mortis, but everyone else would see her as a regular mortal, a person. Her eyes were emerald, her hair was platinum, and she looked like nothing but a human, just another one of the species that existed in the galaxy. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka would see her as they saw her on Mortis, without as much glow. Her gifts would be hidden from the clones, the Jedi, and the Sith. No one except this trio may know of her identity, and she expressed heartily that they were not to tell the High Council of her arrival. Too many unknown factors could disrupt her purpose here. When they landed inside the hangar bay of Admiral Yulorn's flagship, there were some wandering eyes. The clones were curious who the Jedi had brought with them, especially Captain Rex. They hadn't mentioned bringing anyone with them, and they had only lost communication for a couple of seconds before they entered Mortis. Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan experienced multiple days on Mortis, but in the regular galaxy, they'd only missed a few blinks of the eye. Rex asked them who their friend was, and Obi-Wan immediately addressed the situation, informing the clone captain that her name was Morai. She was a friend they had met prior to entering hyperspace. She was what they called on Stujon a traveling priestess. She practiced the Force and listened to the hum of its vibration. Outside of his homeworld, they called them psychics or mediums, but Obi-Wan just suggested that they refer to her as Priestess Morai. The clone nodded his head and welcomed her aboard the ship, and she smiled softly but didn't say a word. Truthfully speaking, the daughter was really out of her element. Very infrequently did the Mortis gods interact with anyone outside of their realm. It had been centuries since their last conversation with a mere mortal, and that individual didn't even come into Mortis. It was a Force Ghost situation without actually being dead. Though the daughter did enjoy the prospect of maintaining an identity that aligned closer to her personality. She didn't want to be a liar or to mislead people. It was highly against her nature. So being a priestess from whatever Stujon was in the galaxy was a fine choice by Kenobi. She appreciated his quick thinking, and the name Morai was perfect enough for her to live with. Initially, she hated being in the mortal realm. The first order of business was discussions surrounding the war effort, so the trio she had become familiarized with were now speaking about battle tactics and plans to conquer territory. It was barbaric in her eyes, and she became really uncomfortable with it. Sensing this, Ahsoka excused herself and Morai from the discussion rooms, and spoke with the elegant goddess alone. Truthfully, Ahsoka had some questions for Morai anyways, because she felt a little different following her apparent resurrection. Due to her not really knowing that she died and came back, or even remembering dying, she was left to prod for information. The daughter would reveal some aspects of Ahsoka's life that would forever be changed. The father had given her an entirely new range of motion within the Force. This wasn't to say that Ahsoka would become as powerful as Skywalker, but she could probably eclipse the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy if she refined her talents. Though it would be in this conversation that Morai would reveal the reason her father sent her along this path. There was a reason for everything, and why she was so insistent on accompanying them. Morai also explained that she wasn't really comfortable around here, though because she had revealed these truths, Ahsoka was not permitted to tell her master about them. They could consequently upset the balance of the cosmic force. This came along with a variety of other omens that the daughter had learned in what was only a short moment of communication with her father, in his final moments. He did tell her some things about the future, but most of it was sharing visions he had. The father's life ended painfully. Instead of a peaceful slide into the cosmic realm, he was barraged with vision after vision of the future. Most of these were pretty horrible, and the daughter was shown them, not to disturb her but to warn her, because he knew that she would join them in the regular galaxy, and he didn't want her to be engulfed by the powers of the Sith. It was partially why she was instantly so uncomfortable, especially around the clones, but also because she could not interfere directly without someone willingly changing the timeline. Ahsoka was only told the bare minimum, but still, the burden that came with that little information could forever impact Ahsoka's view of anything. Morai would be given her own chambers, and Anakin would bunk with the clones, because that'd be like a big slumber party for all of them. The daughter wasn't pleased with being stuck inside the fleet. She was really easygoing with everything, but internally she suffered immensely by watching death firsthand. The state of the galaxy was maddening. It was also heart-wrenching. Even though she had seen what the clones were capable of through the various visions she experienced with the father, she could sense their individuality. They were all people, even if they were cloned from machines. And when each of them were killed by a battle droid, she felt the pain in her heart. Morai tried to avoid the first few skirmishes by bunkering inside of her room, the one Anakin used to sleep in. But when the imagination of the death she felt became too much, she spent her time on the bridge so that when she saw the death, it no longer was imaginary. Morai struggled with death not because of the concept, but what she felt. She experienced as much as the clones did in real time, but slowed down. So instead of the quick fire in the vacuum of space, with each explosion in a dogfight, she could feel the warmth of the fires and the pit of iciness that was space. The constant shift from heat to cold was jarring for her senses, and it was lessened greatly when she actually watched the battle, because seeing it was somehow better than imagining what she was feeling. Aside from the clones who were being pretty much used as cannon fodder, the daughter was able to sense the distinct differences between Force users present, notably Kenobi, Tano, and Skywalker. The first two were typically more put off by the battles they faced. Regardless of how small these initial skirmishes were, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka weren't thrilled to be fighting. They were doing it for the betterment and protection of their men. Anakin did too, but there was an added sense of stoicism or thrill in all of this. Skywalker didn't like the death as much as anyone else did, but he found some sense of excitement in the heat of battle. The daughter knew that this came from his thrill-seeking pod racing adventures as an adolescent, but still, it gave her great cause for concern because when would it be enough for him? These were distractions. She could see it upon her entry to this world. Whoever held the power of the Force in their grips, the Sith as they called themselves, they were simply pushing him down the road with more alluring, adventurous excitements. The galaxy was being transformed into a device to be held by one power, and Skywalker hadn't yet connected those dots. More I saw someone focused on the moment, on the individual present action, rather than what came next. There was no sense of the future, no contention for what it could hold for anyone, just the moment and what it brought for him. Combat was never easy, and the conquest of the galaxy was all designed for distraction, something that was clearly beyond his control. Morai just hoped that the day would come when Anakin could see what was happening and change the course of galactic history for good. That's what needed to happen more than anything else. The trio would eventually be split up when Obi-Wan's fleet was dispatched elsewhere. By the time he left, he wished Morai well on her journeys with Skywalker and Tano. The two of them had grown the closest in the first few weeks of Morai being in the galaxy. Ahsoka knew the secrets, but Obi-Wan knew the daughter. He understood her the best he could, and that brought him comfort, knowing that someone of such complexity could be around Anakin. Unlike Ahsoka, he was completely unaware of her plans or mission, or why she was sent into the galaxy, but she too enjoyed Obi-Wan's company. They had grown as mentors, in some regard, by interacting with each other as frequently as they did. Anakin and Morai weren't around each other a whole lot, not by choice or neglect, but because Anakin was instructing Ahsoka more often than not. When he wasn't doing that, he was focused on strategy. Aiding his lack of focus on his new ally was the fact that he slept in the trooper bunker, so he never really had the chance to think about or meditate on why he told her he needed her on Mortis. He saved her life, and yet it was never a reoccurring thought. The daughter knew the answer, she never questioned it after the father gave her the visions he did. But there remained a lack of transparency for Anakin. He just never thought to question it because it escaped his mind all the time. For 2 months, they'd be on the campaign trail. Ahsoka continued to further her bond with Morai, while Anakin became almost negligent to her presence. The daughter was more of an aid to Ahsoka than anything else. She understood the powers of her father, and she was able to suggest exercises that benefited Ahsoka immensely. So, in coalition with the training she received from Anakin, Ahsoka thrived in ways she never had before. But then, they made their return to Coruscant. Obi-Wan had informed the council of Anakin's priestess friend, so they weren't surprised when the trio of Anakin, Morai, and Ahsoka walked into the temple. However, there was an intrigue from Skywalker of his new friend. Due to not being on the battlefield anymore and taking a break from active deployment, he was around Morai a lot more than usual. Honestly, most of the Mortis debacle had been forgotten about. When he wasn't busy with 100 other things, those memories were surfaced, and questions started to loom. The first of these started when Anakin found Morai in the Jedi Temple garden. Still seeing the pristine look of the Mortis goddess, he remembered what he had learned in the Forbidden Realm. The planet of the gods of the Force was something he should have given more time to, admittedly. After speaking to the council about various dealings in the Outer Rim sieges, and various interests for them, he found himself searching for answers from the goddess. Her placement inside the Jedi Temple Garden was serene for her. It was her first chance to find a natural access to the Force. It was very limited, but for Morai it was like breathing. Mortis provided a sanctuary in which the Force itself could provide and thrive. The Jedi Temple and Star Cruisers simply did not. This beautiful little tree, hidden behind concrete walls, was a taste of what made Morai so despondent. She yearned for connection to the roots of the Force, and the physical roots of this tree were the only provider for her since they left her home. Perhaps it was homesickness, the war, or just a lack of connection to the Force, but Morai had been struggling secretly, and it was here where she and Anakin finally connected for the first time. Skywalker admitted that he felt bad for having forgotten her inside of the starship. There were a great many distractions, and while Morai wouldn't openly forgive him for the neglect, she did at the very least appreciate the consideration. He then asked her why she spent so much time inside the garden, and much of her aforementioned feelings were revealed. The final promise her father made her swear by did not evaporate, it just manifested into different forms. Here, she did not reveal anything about her father's request. She just told the truth about her own struggles. Anakin felt bad for keeping her away from the Force, and then came to understand that he hadn't ever truly been that connected to it. She shook her head and told him that on certain planets he may have felt a sense of euphoria without proper causation. That was the Force. The natural feeling of lambency was a greater calm, one of the physical body drawing off its greatest gifts. The tree here, inside the garden, only had so much to share, only so much to give to such a vast order. What Skywalker experienced and felt on Mortis was all she had ever known. That gift of the Force was one she had grown to take for granted, and one that Skywalker had seemingly already forgotten. The war was strenuous, and the frustrations that came with loss would amount, naturally. There was nothing about the political landscape that she could change, but perhaps what he said he needed on Mortis was not her, but the light. She represented a variation of what the Jedi chased throughout their entire lifespan, not just individuals but the religion itself. They chased the purity that she emitted, that she found on Mortis. If that was what Anakin needed, then why not find a Vergence or a hub of the Force? The responsibilities of the war did not eclipse his duty to himself. Anakin tried to correct her because, as a master to a student, a Jedi Knight, a Jedi General, and so forth, he had to uphold some semblance of care towards others, and she did not refute that. However, caring for oneself was gifting those he cared about the most a more illustrious being that could provide and care more than the one who neglected his own sufferings. As twisted as the words may have been, and even if they didn't fully make sense, she was right. Anakin could feel it in his heart that Morai was right, and so he bowed to her and moved to the Jedi Archives to consult Jocasta Nu. And the following afternoon, Master, Apprentice, and Priestess would be heading out to a lesser-known planet, thanks to Jocasta Nu. During the High Republic, Jedi Scouts were sent around the galaxy to search for hubs or vergences of the Force. One such squad found this planet. It sat in the ashes of a former civilization. The planet was called Proxima Suna. The Jedi took note of it, per the older archivist notes. Jocasta said that the Jedi abandoned the location due to Nile networks running through the abandoned streets. Since the High Republic and the fall of the Nile, the planet became completely abandoned. She did warn that marauders could still live in the streets, but she explicitly told him that there was a high concentration of the Force on the planet. If he trusted his instincts, he might find it. Proxima Suna was a large green globe, with tiny pockets of water, visible from orbit. Once they sped through the planet, they could see streams and rivers in vast quantities, but no large bodies of water. Anakin landed the T6 shuttle, where he felt the best location was, and the trio exited. It felt a little similar to their experience on Mortis, at least for Ahsoka and Anakin. But once they stepped off the ship, they could feel the vast array of the Force. It was everywhere, but the two Jedi looked to Morai so that she might guide them, and she didn't seem very interested in doing that. She was a guide, not their guide. Her position was simply to aid. She had, at least in her mind, intervened too much inside the temple garden. But this was Anakin's choice. She did not force him to make it. He made it himself. They walked a couple miles and set up camp, which was under the shadow of a former skyscraper. The society present here wasn't very advanced, and the truth is, what wiped them out wasn't warfare nor plague. They had just migrated away until the last of their people either stayed or died, or vanished into the forests. By this point, the local intelligent species had vanished from the system, and the natural beauty of the system took over the world it once owned. Inside their little camp, by the fire, they spoke to each other methodically. Morai walked them through meditations she liked to use on Mortis. Here on Proxima Suna, the Force was strong. Unlike Brendok, this was not a Virgin's, but more like Tanalor or Tython. It was a planet gifted with the Force itself, in great presence. For Ahsoka, now imbued with the gifts of the Father, she felt at home. And for the literal Virgins himself, Anakin, for the first time, enjoyed the meditation he commenced. On Coruscant, inside the stiff, constraining walls of the temple, he could never find peace. The natural planet existed below thousands of levels of city, an abandoned city. Here, though, despite the population abandoning the structures, they were one with nature. There was no attempt to burn away its weaving vines and growing plants like on Coruscant. Skywalker could literally touch the ground and feel what seemed to be the heartbeat of the planet, and this only continued further with his own internal meditations. His sense of insight and the gift of visions he had took him to places far beyond himself. On Mortis, he had questions without answers. Here, though, in the serenity of this planet's quietness, he didn't search for anything. He let in everything he felt. He became one with the Force as the Force was with him. For the first time in his life, the Chosen One and the Force connected on a deeper level, one that didn't require restraint or friction, just a peaceful unification between two entities that should have always been one. Anakin had experienced similar highs to this while pod racing or in battle, but nothing came close to what he experienced here. The comfort and warmth of Morai near him erased any potential friction for him exponentially. Suddenly, his own understandings of his outburst on Mortis became clear. He needed the daughter to guide him into the next steps of his Jedi path. This wasn't some force of need for anything other than understanding himself. His soul craved the Force, and he had saved the daughter on instinct because his soul knew more than his heart or his mind. In that moment, as he was now, he was completely in synchronicity with the Force, and it felt like home. When they left Proxima Suna, they felt reinvigorated. Anakin, though, was changed beyond anything he had ever felt before. The visions he had become known to have, those like the ones he had about his mother, were more frequent. They were expanded on the system they just left. Those feelings of distrust towards the clones that Morai first experienced started to find home within Anakin. He worried irrationally, or at least he internally believed those fears could be rational. The thrill-seeking Anakin Skywalker did return to the galaxy from Proxima Suna, but he found those thrills through different methods. Moments of excitement were not what Skywalker was looking for anymore. His craving was the euphoric high he sensed on a planet that naturally benefited him. Yet before he could find or search for that feeling, he needed to confront something. The reason he had saved Morai, the reason he needed her was the guidance she possessed and could willingly give. Their trip to Proximus was not a misstep in the change of fate that was the father's death. Every moment, no matter how small, was leading to something larger. He could feel it. In the visions he experienced, he saw it. The galaxy was going to come apart in some fashion. As Force visions typically were, as they were for Sifo Dyas nearly 13 years before, they were ambiguous. The fate was unknown. No one knew what would come from them, and Yoda always suggested that one should be very careful while sensing the future. Anakin tried to be, but right now, in this moment, that felt unwise. Their return to Coruscant was met with the first true time spent together between daughter and Skywalker. She, of course, as the Force wills, could not intervene, but she could answer questions. While some of her answers would be vague and thus frustrating for Anakin, he listened with intent. The connection to the Force was pure on Proximus, but when he left, and he was able to internalize his visions, he understood the gravity of what needed to be done. Anakin's visions consisted of 3 various realities. In the first one, he saw the Jedi slaughtered by the clones. The vision depicted the clones stepping over and around dead Jedi while killing the wounded inside the temple. The second was a memorial service, one that was paraded through Naboo. There was no understanding of who it was for Anakin. It could be either Padme or Palpatine, but because the Chancellor was older, he assumed it to be him. This was, ironically, the vision that felt the most comfortable. The third of these was a betrayal. He was at the bottom of the Jedi Temple steps. He was surrounded by fire, and Obi-Wan stood above him. None of this made sense. but these were the 3 visions he saw. The daughter could not directly tell him what these meant, because she had seen them too when the father showed her, but she could tell him that what he felt with each of these visions would be the result of the timeline incurred. She also revealed that the one that felt and looked the most clear was the one that they were heading towards. It was the highest likelihood of coming to fruition. Anakin then suggested that they return to Proxima Suna to understand these visions in greater detail, but Morai warned against this, because the truth is, the Force could not give him the direct answer. These were paths, choices that he alone could set on the galaxy. Even though there was no reason to, at least based on what Morai said, Anakin removed himself from active combat completely. He forced Ahsoka to take her trials at the age of 16, and she passed. She was able to, thanks in part to the combined training she received from Anakin and Morai. As a knight though, Anakin would give her the reins of the 501st, allowing her to become general if she wanted, or permit Rex to become martial commander. The choice was between the 2 of them, as Anakin stated. This rush action from Anakin blindsided many, but he even suggested that Morai remain in Ahsoka's company. The Jedi Council and a couple of the men of the 501st questioned these motives, but no clairvoyant answer could be given. This was because Anakin didn't know the answer himself. He was on his own spiritual journey, and all of these choices came with rationale as soon as it became discovered. By making Ahsoka go through her trials, which she passed with flying colors, it made Anakin a Jedi Master at the age of 21. With this new role, he was given access codes to the restricted sections, which for Anakin was not a craving of knowledge. Getting into the restricted sections didn't honestly mean anything for Skywalker. All the information he could possibly need were inside the archives, not just a restricted section. But the big thing Anakin needed was serenity, and he could find that inside the restricted section. Unlike the temple garden, this area of the temple was completely secluded. There was no outside noise, and very infrequently did a Jedi visit it. Anakin just wanted to find home in the Force on Coruscant. What he believed he needed from the daughter was the light she had, but realistically, he just needed to be open to finding said light himself. She didn't do that for him, he did that. On Proximus, he found it, and once more, here inside the archives, did he find a semblance. Thousands of years of information and history surrounded him, and it made him feel comfortable. However, the Sith were making plans to change that. Because Anakin, within weeks of returning from another deployment, started acting erratically, Palpatine started to worry. He didn't want his prized apprentice to slip into the shadow of the light. As a means to ensure the longevity of his descent into darkness, Palpatine requested for Tyrannus to join him inside the works. The 2 Sith would, using Sidious's connection to Anakin, begin an alchemic ritual. As they started, Anakin was in the middle of a 3-day-long retreat into the Force. He hadn't seen or heard anything, so he stayed focused. Like a sneeze that wouldn't release, Anakin felt the touch of the Force. What he was looking for was so close he could almost feel it, but the answers remained just outside of his reach. Until, of course, the Sith tried to intermingle with what they shouldn't, as they always did. Anakin's vision would be interrupted, inside the vision itself. Skywalker had only seen darkness. This was his eyes being closed, not the actual dark side of the Force. In this obscure abyss, he was shown a semblance of light, finally, but it was blue. It did not feel like the Force itself on Proxima Suna, so he raised his hands and felt towards the burning blue flame. And he rose from his feet. Something was off about all of this, and he didn't know what it was. Skywalker, though, knew it had originated from the dark side. The purity of the natural Force was identifiable. This was not that. It was trying to leech on his power. Because Anakin was inside the restricted section, he started to absorb various pieces of knowledge, and in a reaction to whatever the Force was trying to show him, he wiped it away. The 2 Sith were standing over an altar, pouring their powers into Anakin, and due to being in such close proximity to each other, Anakin ripped his hands open, and with such a violent pull to stop these blue shadows from dancing inside of his head, he accidentally opened 2 black holes beside Tyrannus and Sidious. The 2 of them were forced out of their alchemic ritual and screamed in terror. Their eyes saw the true power of the Force, and their attempt to destroy or disrupt Anakin's peace was in vain. All of his gifts and natural affinities were used against them with their own power, and they were forever destroyed in one singular millisecond. The Sith were completely removed from the galaxy. they were gone. Their religion erased from existence, and thus left the rest of the war to unfold. Ahsoka remained in charge of the 501st, and Anakin continued to meditate. Truthfully, he had no clue that he had killed a single soul. He just believed his vision had been disrupted by a distraction, but that was never the case. His mind was infiltrated, and he vanquished the Sith in his body and his soul with one singular motion. Though this did not end the Clone War. Their continuation hinged on General Grievous and the Separatist Council. As impatient as Grievous was, the Separatist Council did not last very long. They very quickly became a target for him. Their insolence was distracting to his perfect war effort. In perhaps the most ironic way though, his disemboweling of the Separatist Council effectively ruined his chances at winning the war. Due to Tyrannus not fully trusting Grievous, he wasn't able to learn that there were millions more battle droids in reserve, not to mention the extra navy that came with it. The droid general killed them shortly before they agreed on activating that military, a move that would have given Grievous the chance to win the conflict without any trouble. He, without his reserve forces, relied heavily on Admiral Trench. Without a temple bombing, thanks to Anakin's involvement on Coruscant, and the lack of critical strikes needed to help the Separatists win the war, Grievous would watch Trench crumble at Ringo Vinda, before he himself was captured by a split group of Obi-Wan and Mace Windu. Anakin, during the waning months of the Clone War, remained away from conflict, as he began his own spiritual journey again. This in a weird way brought him closer to Padme. He was more aligned with himself than ever before, so while he became more priestly as a Jedi, he also adopted a more agreeable sense of self. When he began his spiritual retreat, the war was weeks from ending. When he returned, the galaxy would be at peace for a full month. Skywalker's spiritual journey took him to Tanalorr, Rendok, Ahch-To, Tython, Proxima Suna, and Dantooine, just to name a few. All of this was for a closer connection to what brought him to this galaxy. His connection to the deeper elements of nature and serenity, and the natural gifts he had to access them, made this the most enjoyable, adrenaline-inducing euphoria he ever experienced in his life. He would never truly learn that just a month or so before this retreat, he had destroyed the Sith. In the end, though, the Clone Wars would come to a conclusion. He would be on Naboo when the empty casket of Sheev Palpatine was ceremoniously paraded through the streets of Theed. The second vision became reality. Anakin wouldn't ever abandon the Jedi Order, but his secret family would continue to grow shortly following the conclusion of the war. While he wasn't permitted to tell the Council about the daughter, or who Morai really was, he did suggest a more religious aspect of the Force from the Jedi, something that the Council would recommend Luminara unduly to assist with. It may have not been his first choice, but the inclusion of Luminara and Barriss, inversely, saw the most seclusive and restrictive aspects of the Jedi Order accepting and bonding with a much more free understanding of the Force. The eventual transformation of the Jedi Order came from Anakin's pre-End of the Clone War expedition. It opened the eyes of the Jedi to what their lives could be. The restrictiveness of the code was bogged down by generations of Jedi separated from the Force itself. Now, in one uniform voice, did the Council realize that they could be so much more as a religious sect, a bureaucratic council, a group of instructors and learners, and so much more. The end of the Clone War would see gradual change across the galaxy, but none more than within the Jedi Order. Despite being seen as a priestess in the eyes of the Council, Morai would become an official Jedi representative. She carried no weapon and only used the Force as her ally. She was entirely what a Jedi should be. Morai would be the first person to learn about Anakin's personal family, and the truth is, she knew. While she would never reveal that the two of the three visions Anakin had on Proxima Suna would have become reality because of family, she would be happy that he found something worth calling his own. Without the life of the actual father, Ahsoka's importance in the continuous growth of the Order couldn't be overstated. As Anakin took his seat within the Council chambers, she found herself with Morai, guiding hundreds of Jedi at a time, sometimes, to several of the most Force-filled locations across the galaxy, to instruct Jedi how to feel the light and use it to embody their every movement. This, in turn, was the beginning of the new golden age of the Jedi Order. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons for supporting this channel. Special thanks... Wait, what? Anyways, let's talk about the story. This one is a very not action-packed story. This is a very meditative story. And it has to be that way, I think. I don't really think you could do a daughter story with a lot of action in it. I do think it is funny that Anakin accidentally destroys the Sith, and I kind of wanted it to feel that way. I really wanted to feel like that as Anakin comes into his element as the Chosen One, the Force realistically should not be a problem for him. His negligence to the Force, his negligence to practicing is really what holds him back. And I think in this story where he just, especially on Mortis, especially with the daughter, especially on the new planet Proxima Suna, I think he finds a semblance of himself that really never existed before. I think in that, he would have so much ease in using the Force that realistically opening up 2 black holes like Luke does in Legends wouldn't really be a challenge for him. It'd be like a second thought, something that he didn't even realize he did. And that's really what I wanted to show, is that Anakin's power in this is not loud, it's not vicious, it's quiet, it's controlled. It's like how Peter Cullen always describes Optimus, the courage to be gentle. That's what I really wanted Anakin to embody here, is that this courage to be gentle. That's what he is at the end of this. He's not seeking combat for power, he's not seeking power from combat, he's finding all of his thrill in himself. And of course, I'm not saying that he can't enjoy pod racing or enjoy spinning, because that's a good trick. It's really a story about self-discovery in all actuality. So I hope you all enjoyed. It's kind of a wholesome PP, but I don't know, up to you guys. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you. Wait, what? Guru.